My name is Randy Campora, and I'm the bass trombonist of the Baltimore Symphony. And I started in the orchestra in 1985, which was the first official year of David Zinman's music directorship. Um, he had been conducting the orchestra for a couple years before that, but I started when he started, or just a few months before that. I started in the spring of 1985. And so that was a nice watermark to start my time in the orchestra with his tenure because we were able to accomplish so many things together. I grew up kind of in two polar opposites of the country. My family was originally from California, the San Joaquin Valley. Both sides of the family were working in agriculture there on a small scale. And I grew up in a little town called Linden, California, which is just outside of Stockton. It's probably about an hour and a half drive directly east of San Francisco Bay. And my grandparents were Italian immigrants, and they had a small orchard. They had walnuts and almonds. And my father, after he graduated high school, came back to be the head football coach at the high school in the little town of Linden. And so that's where I grew up on the orchard until I was about 6 years old. Then we moved into the little town itself, which is about 1,000 people. And then when I was 11 years old, my father got a call from a friend of his who said he had just gotten elected the Speaker of the House of Representatives of the state of Florida, and would he come and be his chief of staff? Because there was nobody that he knew that he trusted enough to do that. And so we moved from one corner of the country all the way to the other, and it was culturally very different, but it was just wonderful for us as a family to get to know just whole different kinds of people, culture, accent, food, trees, jungle, animals, just, sports. It was just really fun. So I was there all the way through first part of college. I went to Florida State University for a couple years, then transferred to Peabody, and that's how I ended up in Baltimore. I was a fairly typical age for beginning brass players. I was 9 years old. I was still in California. I think in Florida they started kids a couple years later when they started at middle school. But in California you could start in the fourth grade, which I think is the same here in Howard County where I'm in Maryland. And I knew the teachers had told us that if we wanted to be in band, we were going to have the next year, we were going to have an opportunity to pick our instrument and join the band program. And so all the whole summer, I was thinking like, what instrument I'm going to pick? Because I figured I was interested in music. I had taken some piano lessons, which my mom wanted me to do. And so I was trying to, the pressure was on, as the summer progressed. I thought, well, I got to figure this out. So I think we were watching maybe a 4th of July parade on television or something. And I noticed a couple things that the trombones were in the front line of the parade. I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And then my little 9-year-old mind was like, well, how does that thing work? Those tubes are going in and out. And certainly you don't have to be a sword swallower to play the trombone, or do you? Like, how does that, what's the deal? So in order to figure out how that stuff all worked, we went to the little session at the very beginning of the year in September, they show you the instruments, you decide which one you're going to pick. And I just remember being very excited at picking the trombone, and my mother always reminds me that I was so happy after that event. They let you bring home your instrument, that night. And I was shaking all the way to the car. I was holding my trombone. And trombone is unique among brass instruments in that it is the only brass instrument that can do a true glissando. Glissare is a word in Italian which means to slide. Playing in an orchestra on a brass instrument is very much like being an opera singer. You have to develop a certain technique with your voice to be able to project it in a very large space and do what the composers are asking you. But the tricky part about that is once you learn how to be a big opera singer and project that sound into a large hall and still sound good, the composers still write you very soft, very controlled, very backgroundy kind of things. So you have to be an opera singer and almost like a lullaby singer kind of at the same time. I'm going to play a beautiful waltz melody from the third movement of the Symphony Fantastique by Hector Berlioz. The trombones don't play this, the basses play this, but this is an example of a faster moving but still flowing melody on the bass trombone. I'm going to steal some repertoire from the double bass section of the orchestra. This is a section of a piece called Carnival of the Animals by Camille Saint-Saëns, and it's called The Elephant. And the trombone doesn't actually play in the orchestra in this piece, but I'm going to play the bass part to show you what a bass trombone sounds like in the low range, playing a slower but kind of jaunty little melody. The bass trombone weighs about probably 6.5 pounds, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about something that you spend hours having in your hands and using as your tool professionally or even just as an amateur, that's a lot of weight to hold up and manipulate. So the first thing is figuring out just how to hold it in a way that doesn't hurt or is doable long term. The other thing is the low brass instruments take a lot of air. They don't take a lot of air pressure like the trumpet, which is a higher, smaller bore, but they take a lot of air flow. And so you have to figure out how to breathe deeply and blow in a way that's not going to be too pressurized or too fast, but also still has energy to it. Over time, you learn how to control your lips to produce what's in your brain. The closest thing that I've ever heard, that I've ever seen to playing an instrument or a brass instrument, and that I've experienced myself, is playing golf. You have the clubs that you have to figure out. You got to figure out how to grip them. You have the stance. You've got all the different shots you have to make, the long ones, the medium ones. You have to putt on the green. It's a very mental game, you know. Your swing can be really, really nice on Thursday, and on Saturday it's just not working, you know. Or you're having a really good round, and for no reason, you don't know why this happened, but your ball went south instead of east, you know. And so it can be really fun and also very challenging. And that's kind of the reason I don't play golf anymore, because it's too close to playing an instrument. Main difference is that the bore is larger to accommodate a deeper sound for the lower notes. And the bell, you can see the bell's a little bit bigger than the tenor trombone. It's the regular length of the trombone is the same. If you know, from the mouthpiece to the bell, it's the same distance. It's in the key of B flat, just like tenor trombone. But everything else is bigger, the mouthpiece, the bell, the bore. And the biggest difference is you have, in order to get some of the lower notes and all of the lower notes, you have to add some tubing that the regular trombone doesn't have. So this tubing here and this tubing here are two valves that are operated with the left hand. So if I can show you how the hand works. You see how I mean? It's a little hard to hold. You have to do the valves and the slide at the same time. And you use those valves to get those lower notes, because you just need more tubing for some of those valves. And meanwhile, with the right hand, you're manipulating the slide. And that goes back to, let me see if I can get this in frame. That goes back to, you don't have to be a sword swallower to play the trombone. It's a very simple inside-outside design, like that. And so you're using the valves and you're doing the slide at the same time while you're buzzing into this mouthpiece that produces the pitch that you want. So that's just the basic difference there. Copland 3 does have a unique instrumentation, and Copland's idea of how to use the brass. And it's very much kind of like a group effort, kind of like, you know, a football team. Like the offense goes out on the field, and then they're done, and then the defense comes out, and then they're done, and the kicking team goes on or something. And it's a lot of large groups entering and exiting, you know. About 4 minutes into the first movement, that's when the brass enter, and they stay on the field for a few minutes. And it's very big playing. It's a big melody, tom team tom team tom team tom, and it goes on, and it's almost like Copland says, I want everyone to listen to this melody. And people are in octaves. There's not a whole lot of harmony. It's really loud, and that goes on for a while. And then one of my favorite moments in the whole entire piece, at the very end of that big section, when he's using the brass as a big group, he goes to a first trombone solo, very soft, very lyrical. And that's played by our wonderful Aaron Levere on this recording. And it's very lyrical, tee-dom, tee-da, dee-da, just really pretty. But all of a sudden, the spotlight is his, and that's very different, you know, from what we just did with this big melody. In the second movement, the tricky thing to begin the second movement is there's a little thing called a rubato in the very beginning of the movement, the very first bars. Rubato is when you shift rhythm from here to there. It's not mathematically just exactly correct. So if you were to play the theme mathematically correct, it would be ba-da-bum bum bim ba-da-bum bim bee, and the metronome would just click along. But Copland starts out with the rubato. He goes ba-da-bum bum bee ba, ba-da-bum bum bee bum, ba-da-bum bum bim, but then he gets into tempo. And that's always really tricky. You got to rehearse that, figure out what the conductor wants to do. The fourth movement is really unique because, as I understand it, he composed the Fanfare for the Common Man in 1942 as a special piece on a commission. I think it was for Cincinnati. Can't remember exactly, but and then when he got the commission, I think by the Boston Symphony for the Copland Third, 2 or 3 years later, he incorporated that into the very beginning transition of the fourth movement, coming from that beautiful slow third movement, and then that fanfare And this, guys, takes a little bit of harmonic changes and takes you right into this really big, strong last movement. And the first time I played this piece, it would take a little bit of getting used to because you're used to the fanfare, and then the version in the Third Symphony goes into a different key in the middle of it. So you have to get used to that. But it's always fun playing that fanfare. We played it a lot in different situations, but it's really fun to play it in the context of a symphony.